It's over 2,500 years since the Buddha Sakyamuni disappeared from the sight of simple mortals, reaching the great nirvana. Today, over half of the world's population has been influenced by his teachings.
The Buddha said that any one of us has the capacity of becoming a Buddha.
And he used to say to his disciples, "Oh disciples, don't accept anything because it is said by the Buddha himself. You take it, see it, analyze it, experience it, and then accept it."
But the story of his life is little known.
The Buddha was the greatest revolutionary, in fact the first revolutionary.
Between what is said in legends over thousands of years and the recent archaeological discoveries, who was the man they called the Buddha? Nobody knows what he looked like. Nobody knows exactly when he was born. Historians think the man who was to be called the Buddha was born between 566 and 430 BC in the foothills of the Himalayas.
Our traditions tell how 10 months before the birth of her child, Queen Maya Devi had a strange dream. A white elephant with 6 tusks, its head painted red, entered into her body. And then it stayed there like a precious stone. King Sudodan called the astrologers. They said that the dream told of the birth of an extraordinarily great master.
According to the tradition of her tribe, the Sakyas, the queen had to give birth to her first child in the house of her parents.
10 months later, it was in late summer. The queen was out traveling and stopped in the village of Lumbini. There was a full moon. Coming here, Queen Maya Devi saw a huge tree with beautiful leaves, which is quite normal in this region. She decided to rest under it. And because it was so hot, she decided to bathe in a nearby pond. After washing herself to her satisfaction, she got out of the water. There were no houses or shelters nearby. It was all jungle. And when she got out, she was in pain, a labor pain. All her servants immediately realized it was time for her child to be born. They draped a cloth fence around Maya Devi and around the tree itself. They sent away the men, and it was then that Prince Siddhartha, the future Buddha, was born.
The birthplace of the Buddha, Lumbini, is known to us thanks to Emperor Ashoka, the first Buddhist emperor of the Indian subcontinent, who lived in the 3rd century before Christ. He erected numerous columns to landmark the important places of the Buddha's life. One of the oldest examples of monument engraving in that part of the world can be seen here on the column of Lumbini.
Agana agacha mahi ite hida buddha jate sakya muniti. Actually, this inscription says that 20th year of Emperor Ashoka's coronation, he himself visited this place because Sakyamuni Buddha was born here. So to commemorate his visit, he erected this pillar and he reduced the taxes of Lumbini village. So this is the only pillar which pinpoints the place Lumbini Game, means Lumbini village was tax reduced because Sakyamuni Buddha was born here.
Via a new interpretation of the writing on the column, archaeologists have found a marker on the Lumbini site which is said to indicate the exact birthplace of Siddhartha.
Here we found a block of a stone in our course of our excavation, and this stone which pinpoints the exact location of the birth of Lord Buddha. This stone is placed on the top of a 7 layers brick platform. And interestingly, this stone was seen by one Chinese pilgrim who came here in 3rd century AD. He said that the exact birth of Buddha is sealed by a stone. And when he visited this place, people, they used to worship and offer flowers and the sweets.
The scriptures tell that the family of the future Buddha belonged to the Sakya tribe. High in the mountains of the Kathmandu Valley, there is a Buddhist tribe calling itself by that name. For thousands of years, Sakya storytellers have been perpetuating and weaving the legend of Siddhartha. They describe his life as a predestined journey, a difficult path, strewn with wonders and miracles.
Immediately after Siddhartha was born, an incredible thing happened. The newborn baby started walking. He took 7 steps, and wherever he placed his foot, there appeared a lotus flower, as if to comfort him on the hard, scorching ground. He continued walking, stepping over the flowers, which appeared spontaneously. 7 lotus flowers.
Treading on each lotus, he raised his forefinger and, facing the east, the Lord declared,
I am born for enlightenment, for the world's good. In this worldly existence, this is my last birth.
And then the queen went back to the palace of her husband, King Sudodan. 7 days after the birth of the prince, she died. The child was entrusted to his aunt, Queen Gotami. At the time, the Indian subcontinent was racked by wars. 16 great kingdoms fought for the control of many tribes. In the foothills of the Himalayas, Siddhartha's father, King Sudodan, ruled the small kingdom of Kapilavastu. The kingdom was of so little importance that only Buddhist texts mention its existence. The first Buddhist sacred texts were only written 2 or 3 centuries after the Buddha's death.
Further, literature mentioned that there were 10 major cities in Kapilavastu. We know the demarcation with the help of this Buddhist literature. It was something like a 300 kilometer in radius. Some early, the scholar, they mentioned that there were 86,000 families of the Sakyas. So that all indicates, and possibly the capital city itself on the bank of river Bhagirathi. That river was used for transportation, irrigation, drinking water, and for the hunting.
Generations of writers have fantasized about the palace of King Sudodan. But where was it? 27 kilometers from Lumbini is the site of the ancient city of Tilarakat. Was this where the Buddha spent his childhood?
The Buddhist scriptures record that the city of Kapilavastu is actually located on the banks of the Bhagirathi. And here you can see very clearly the city of Tilarakot is located beside the banks of this river. It's on the skyline just ahead of me, and it's marked by trees growing along the ramparts. And this river, the Banganga, leads eventually down into the Ganges.
In the 5th century AD, a Chinese pilgrim called Huan Seng walked in the footsteps of the Buddha. He saw at Tillarakat the ruins of a fortified city that he identified as being the lost city of Kapilavastu. He described its location very precisely at 27 kilometers from the birthplace of the Buddha, Lumbini. A UNESCO team excavated on the site of Tillarakat in order to date the lost city. The archaeologist Robin Cunningham led the dig.
The great city of Kapilavastu was the capital of the Sakya tribe. And it was this capital to which the Buddha was brought. Here he grew up a kingly life. The city is recorded to have been destroyed, and since the 19th century, archaeologists have been trying to identify the location of the lost city of Kapilavastu. This site, Tillarakat, is one of the strongest suspects for this city. Indeed, its topography is very similar to the topography described of Kapilavastu by Chinese pilgrims.
The other sources that describe the life of the Buddha are sacred Buddhist texts, yet all were written centuries after his death. The writings tell how upon returning from Kapilavastu to his father's castle, the child was named Siddhartha Gautama.
In the Indian tradition, we have a name-giving ceremony. So it was decided that this person has a magnificent sign of birth. So his name was given as Siddhartha. Siddha Artha. Artha means one who's accomplished himself in true sense.
The news quickly spread throughout the country that a prince had been born at the castle of Kapilavastu. One day, an old sage named Asita came to pay homage to Siddhartha.
The seer held the baby on his lap and predicted, "Oh, this boy is endowed with 32 auspicious qualities. He will attain ultimate wisdom. He will embark on the journey to enlightenment." The king was relieved that his son would have a long life. But still the king thought, if my only son goes, who will be my successor? And if he opts for enlightenment and leaves the palace, who will wear the crown? This made the king sad and serious.
The seer predicted that if the prince chose the religious path, he would free the world from suffering. But he also added that Siddhartha could be the greatest king on the sole condition that he would never leave the palace. So the king decided to make sure it wouldn't happen.
The king raised the palace walls to stop him, but then he had higher walls made to see if someone could leap over them. First one tried, then another. In the end, the king built a wall of enormous height and a door requiring 16 people to open it. Can you imagine 16 people?
At the site of Tillarakat, archaeologists discovered under the ground the ruins of a great wall that had encircled a city. It is the only fortified ancient city in the region.
I suppose the strongest evidence in favour of the city of Tillarakat being the city of Kapilavastu must relate to the presence of these massive fortification walls on which I'm standing. We know from the Chinese pilgrims' descriptions in the 5th century AD that they saw a city which was a major city, a city heavily fortified. Now, much of the evidence that we find here is actually very closely linked to that. We find a major fortification wall here. It's about 8 meters long, and also it's a fortification site with some antiquity.
Legend has it that Siddhartha spent his childhood in a magnificent palace.
I imagine that the palace of Siddhartha Buddha was very huge, extremely beautiful. There were many elephants and horses.
I think that the palace of Siddhartha Gautama must have been very beautiful. The shrines and temples inside the palace must have been very impressive.
The palace was decorated with different marble statues and monuments. There was also a very impressive pond. It must have been sublime.
Archaeology gives us a more realistic view of the lifestyle at the time of Siddhartha.
When trying to reconstruct what life might have been like in the ancient city of Kapilavastu, I think we have to abandon the normal concept contained in the Buddhist scriptures. We're not dealing with a city of wide streets, many merchants, and houses built of brick and tile. None of these actually fully existed at the time of the Buddha. I think we're dealing with concepts of very simple settlements, where perhaps no more than a cluster of 20 houses centered around one larger house, the house of the ruler or the Raja. This gives a very clear view of simplistic living, rural living, rather than the urban, complex societies which developed later.
Kapilavastu was located in the jungle where a lot of wild animals would live. The young Siddhartha probably faced many dangers. In Nepal, in the rural region of Terai, the Taru tribe lived practically the same way as their forefathers did 2,500 years ago. All around Lumbini, they grow rice, mustard, barley, and sesame, and they fish and tend animals, as in the time of Siddhartha.
So perhaps by looking more at the Terai and more at communities like the Taru, we can begin to understand more what life was like at the time of the Buddha. At this site at Tilarakot, we encountered evidence of post-hole structures, rectangular structures. We encountered evidence of mud hearths and also storage facilities. Therefore, visiting this is very useful because we can see very similar examples actually in real life here. The structures that are used here for the simple clay ovens are very similar structures to the ones that we've excavated. Even the post-hole structures begin to mimic or give us ideas of the architecture that might actually have existed at the time of the Buddha. The pots, although they're made of metal now, these are very similar shapes to traditional ones made of clay. These similarities are to some extent not particularly surprising because these are all locally available materials. And the subsistence followed traditionally by the Taru people are very similar to the evidence of subsistence that we get from the site of Tilarakot as well. And here the Taru have this threefold reliance on cultivated materials, on hunted materials, and also on fish materials.
Some scholars think that the Taru are descendants of the tribe of the historical Buddha.
Taru have similar faces to the Lord Buddha. For example, many Taru have their earlobes stretching downward. Given those similarities, I feel that the Taru are the descendants of the Lord Buddha. The different relics that have been kept in the Tillarakat Museum and the Lumbini Museum, the utensils and various ornaments, are still used in our Taru society, in each of our homes. So there is a surprising similarity between those relics and the everyday objects we use in our homes.
All items from the digs at the archaeological site reside in the Tillarakat Museum.
This pottery here is some of the most significant because this demonstrates that the site of Tillarakat actually was occupied at the very beginning of the first millennium BC. This is painted greyware in a tali form, and this is usually given a date of the 8th and 9th centuries BC. These are some of the first examples that we get of coinage in this area. And I think it's important to realize that the time of the Buddha is a period of enormous social and economic change. The changes are twofold, and they represent both the growth of city-states within the Ganga plain. These are fortified settlements which even begin to produce coinage with their own dynastic symbols. At the same time, we've got the development of trading corporations and guilds. And these groups are also making use of coinage because for the first time, you can actually transport wealth very easily. This is a representation of both dynasty and also wealth.
The scriptures say that Siddhartha's family worked in the fields. One hot July day, the whole family went to plant rice. They left the young Siddhartha under a tree.
After arranging all the comforts for the prince, they set out to work. They were working and enjoying the day. The sun was already setting in the west. It must have been 3 or 4 o'clock. Suddenly, the attendants remembered the prince. "Oh, we left our prince back there. We were supposed to look after him." Then they started running. Something very strange is going on here. All the shadows had shifted, and the sun was setting. But the shade of the tree under which the prince was resting was still in the same position.
They discovered Siddhartha squatting in silence. He was under the tree, meditating for the first time. In the 6th century BC, the Indian subcontinent was a melting pot, a hodgepodge of customs, beliefs, and languages that no single religion brought together. The sacred texts, though, claim that Siddhartha's family was influenced by the Vedas, the oldest Hindu teachings.
What is correct, historically correct, is that the Vedas already existed. And Siddhartha Gautama was a follower of Shivaism. He was a Shivite. That means the god Shiva.
That means Shiva.
And that is recurrent in much of Buddhist literature.
This is a very good example of a traditional temple for the Taru. This is also, as you can see, a very clear natural temple, a temple created from timber as well as from the banyan tree. And so it creates a very powerful focus for this community. It's a sort of an incorporation of elements of antiquity with modern structures of clay. And so I think probably this is the closest we can get to some of the more simple temples which actually covered this plain in the time of the Buddha. The religion of the Taru combines a series of elements of Hinduism, such as we see here with a small shrine to Shiva, but also incorporates within that elements of ancestor worship and the sacrifice to the ancestors.
In the south of Nepal today, the shamans of the Taru tribes stick to these traditions. The shaman has just sacrificed a pig to honor the ancestor, the god who founded the village. He enters into a trance to make contact with him.
But so
it was in this religious context that the young Siddhartha would be initiated at the age of 6.
When he turned 6, he was subjected to a traditional ritual. They adorned him with beautiful clothes and ornaments and took him to the temple to worship. His stepmother, Queen Gautami, said, "Now we should formally initiate him into our family tradition. He must go through the childbirth ritual. We should take him to our family deity, stick to our family tradition." As the prince was taken inside the temple, something miraculous happened. All those gods, the stone gods, suddenly stood up in respect of the prince. Everyone was in awe of this incredible sight. They said, "We knew that you would be born to free all the sentient beings in the world. You have come to visit us. In fact, you are the one who was supposed to come." Saying this, these gods bowed down to the prince.
King Suddhodan wanted to give his son the best possible education. No one is sure that writing existed in the region at the time, but many texts claim that young Siddhartha learned to read and write. He spoke several languages before he went to school and thus astonished his teacher.
The Lord Buddha, when he was still a child, was very bright and sharp. He was a very peaceful child who would not brawl. He was endowed with loving kindness, a compassionate attitude. These traits were apparent very early in his life.
It was a time of wars and looting. Siddhartha's family belonged to the warrior caste, the Shastriyas, so he was probably trained as a warrior. Yet he was different, and his cousin Devadatta found that maddening and hard to understand, and so he came to hate him.
One day, while they were playing, Devadatta shot a swan who was flying and fell down just near Prince Siddhartha. Siddhartha saw the wounded and desperate swan and felt great pity. This must be an act of Devadatta. He is always doing this kind of thing. I should take care of the swan.
He went on his knees and with a lot of care, he removed the arrow from the swan and caressed its feathers.
The swan walked away slowly. Just then, Devadatta came running to find his prey. He saw Siddhartha letting the swan go. Infuriated, he told Siddhartha that it was his prey, that he shot the swan, and therefore he owned it. This is not the swan you shot, since I have cured him. You have no right over this swan. Because neither of them wanted to yield, they went to the king to arbitrate. The king appreciated Siddhartha and berated Devadatta for his act.
In this story of the swan, one can see the germ of the concepts of compassion and nonviolence. It's a lovely tale of innocence, but real life was much harder and far more cruel. Ritual sacrifices were very common, and not just birds.
We had animal sacrifice here in many of our temples. Temples of goddess Parvati. Animals were being sacrificed, and many historians have given accounts of how human beings were sacrificed in Nepal also. And such type of sacrifices, Lord Buddha must have felt that it was much too heart-wrenching. He revolted against that, and that is why he stood for ahimsa. That means non-violence, no animal sacrifice, no sacrifice of any living beings.
When Siddhartha reached the age of 16, King Suddhodan announced it was time for him to marry. The king sent his men to search for a bride throughout the land, and also in neighboring kingdoms. Siddhartha had to offer every girl who came a present.
The king built 3 palaces for his son Siddhartha. The palaces were filled with girls, among which his son was to choose a wife. In each palace, there were 4,000 girls. Among the girls, Prince Siddhartha couldn't find a girl that he really liked. All the girls were beautiful, but none possessed the qualities essential for being a good wife. The prince gave gifts to all the girls, but none of them pleased him.
Yet near the end of the ceremony, another girl arrived. Her name was Yatsudara. The Buddhist texts describe her as a cowgirl, but cows, of course, are sacred.
Yachodhara was the daughter of a king called Dandapani. Yachodhara said to herself, I have millions of jewels. I don't need any more. So she didn't go to receive her gift. And at the end of the evening, she prepared to leave quietly, the last to go. Siddhartha said to her, since you didn't come to get your present, now I have none to give you, but I have my own diamond necklace, which is of inestimable value. I will give it to you. The prince put it around her neck. And as soon as he did, all those present cried out, You said you didn't like young girls, and you end up giving this one your priceless diamond necklace. It means you want to marry her, you love her. That's why you gave her the necklace. You said, I don't want to get married, but you do love Yachodhara. That's why you put the necklace around her neck. Everyone was happy. Afterwards, King Suddhodana left to visit King Dandapani. Your son is useless, so I will not give you my daughter. She is knowledgeable, the most intelligent of all girls. She is unlike your son, who does nothing but meditate, who gives gifts to others. He is not like you, who makes war and loots to gain riches. Your son can't ride a horse. He can't use a bow. He doesn't know how to count. He knows nothing.
Siddhartha asked his father to organize a tournament to show off his skills to his future father-in-law. It wasn't going to be easy. Siddhartha would be matched against the finest archers, the best horsemen, and the wisest men.
Siddhartha said, I will place myself among you, the finest of archers. Go into the four corners, shoot at me, 15,000 arrows with each bow. If I avoid them, I will survive. Otherwise, I will be dead. The four archers began to shoot from the four corners, and none of the 60,000 arrows hit the prince, not even a scratch. Oh, we've got no more arrows. No one can touch him. Not one of the four greatest archers could hit him.
Siddhartha won every competition, hands down.
Oh, what a surprise. Everyone was in awe of Siddhartha. In everything he tried, he had succeeded. King Dandapani came up to Siddhartha and said, Prince, I'm sorry I treated you badly. You have won against everybody, and I shall give you my daughter's hand.
But did Siddhartha marry for love? On this point, opinions vary.
There's no question that Siddhartha loved his future wife. He loved her. Thus, it's a fact that Siddhartha loved her. He married her by choice. It wasn't done without love. Marriage is one of life's experiences. So by considering that experience necessary, he got married. But it was not without feeling love. It's true he was always experimenting one thing or another, with the aim of being able to explain things easily.
आफूले अनुभव भएको व्यक्तिले मात्रै अरूलाई बताउनले सक्छ नि सजिलो हुन्छ नि
No, it wasn't a love match. Prince Siddhartha was not old enough. But Siddhartha was made to marry so that he would not leave the palace. He married against his wishes. When he was young, he said he wanted to leave the palace. It was for that reason that the king had him marry so young, so that Siddhartha would stay.
To chito da piani moko, Mr. Da Puleji, a chito da piani mokurga.
13 years went by, and Siddhartha reached the age of 29 without ever leaving his gilded cage, the royal palace. He didn't know much about the so-called real world. Feeling like a prisoner, Siddhartha asked his father if he could leave the palace at once. Despite the predictions of the seer, the king agreed. And on that very day, Siddhartha left the palace for the first time, accompanied by his charioteer, Chandaka.
As the prince entered the royal road, suddenly he saw a sick man. The man was skinny, his body pale and shaking and panting, crying out incoherent words in distress. The prince saw that this man was between life and death.
Who is this man? Asked the prince. Ah, this is a sick man. All his strength has been drained out by the disease. Is it a normal process? Would it also strike us? We cannot be sure it will strike us or not. But it struck him, and we too are vulnerable. Prince was visibly distressed and left. Then the prince encountered an old man, almost toothless, struggling to keep his balance, clinging to his stick.
This disorder, is it produced only in him, or is this common to all of us? Yes, O prince, we are all subject to it. Once we are born, we all grow old like this, and we will meet a similar fate one day. Thus, hearing the reply, the prince said to himself, "This world is ephemeral," and left. Further down the road, he saw a dead man being carried away by people. He got a closer look, and he saw a man decorated by yellow clothes and flowers, followed by wailing people. "Oh, what happened to this man? Where is he being carried away like this?" inquired the prince. "He is a dead man, bereft of sense and qualities of life. Now they are taking his body away." The prince said, "It is not nice. Let's turn back." "Is this man's fate exclusive to him, or are all of us subject to it?" asked the prince. "Of course. We'll die too. We have no alternative. Once we are born, destruction is inevitable."
Lastly, he saw a monk. When the prince saw the holy man, wearing a yellow robe, a begging bowl in his hand, suddenly it all made sense to him, and he aspired to adopt a similar life.
The Buddhist texts say that these 4 visions moved Siddhartha deeply. They made him see the futility of royal life, of being pampered in the palace, given the immensity of human suffering. After this, his path became clear. For the rest of his life, he sought a way by which to stop the suffering of human beings.
So the late Buddhist literature, they mention that, which I do not believe it. That mentioned that, he saw these 4 sins, which doesn't have any, the true, real sense of that. A man of 29, you should know that one has to get old, one has to get sick, one has to die. My observation and my study, rather, if you see the socio-economic, the condition of that period. See, for example, the political system. It was a feudalism. There was always fight between one clan to other clan, one kingdom to other kingdom. Go, fight, loot the things, come back. So Siddhartha saw that, why people are doing that. Why they are killing for each other for some property. And if you see the religious condition, people, it was a sacrifice system was there. So that sort of, socio-economic condition of that period, political system of that period, religious custom of that period made him to search, what is the real thing.
Siddhartha clearly didn't like the society in which he lived, and there was much not to like. He was also shocked by the caste system. At the root of the caste system is hierarchy. It states that an untouchable, someone without caste, doesn't even have the right to touch a member of a higher caste. He only has the right to carry out the lowliest, dirtiest jobs. The Brahmins, the elite, are the priests and official astrologers. They decide at a child's birth what will be his destiny, his profession, and who will be his wife.
Sixth century India was a period when there was a great Reformation movement. There was a revolt against the existing system. At that time, the existing system was too much of Brahmanism. Religion itself became very costly. The priest would demand much in donation. Until and unless you don't do such and such thing, you won't get, you can't go to heaven.
There was a caste system. There were some group of people called Brahmins. They are doing nothing, but they are having a very lavish life. Siddhartha saw that everybody's tears is salty. Everybody's blood is red. Then why some people are called Brahmin and why people are called Shudra? Every human being are equal.
Siddhartha became obsessed by one thing. He wanted to leave the palace forever, but he also wanted his father to agree. And so one night, he decided to confront the king.
Father, I've come to request 4 things. Fine. What do you want? That I will never grow old, that I will never get sick, and I want the assurance that I will never die, that I may be free from lust, greed, hatred, and violence. I came here to ask these 4 assurances of you. Hearing what Prince Siddhartha had just asked, the king was at a loss for words. Then he said, "Oh, these things even the gods can't give you. I can only give you the things I have. Take this kingdom, take all its riches, take all its lands, even this palace, take the cities. But these 4, I cannot give them to you. In that case, I will go about my search," said the prince. "You know best," replied the king. After this meeting, the prince thought, "Now I have received my father's permission."
And then an event changed his life. After 13 years of marriage, Yashodhara gave Siddhartha a son. He was born during an eclipse. The child was named Rahula, a name signifying eclipse or obstacle. A great celebration was organized at the palace, but the birth didn't give Siddhartha inner peace.
Just when he was about to leave, he became a father. Oh my God! Since it's a son named Rahula, my son has the power to stop the sun and the moon. My son is a Rahu. He will hold me here now. This isn't good. Rahula won't let me go now. I've got to stay here.
During a full moon in July, while the palace was celebrating, Siddhartha decided it was time. Yashodhara was sleeping alongside their son. He opened the bedroom door for one last look at his son and tiptoed out without waking his wife. Then he rode with his faithful companion, Chandaka, to the border of the kingdom of Kapilavastu, where he sent the horse and the servant back to the palace and continued on alone.
Siddhartha took off his vestments and jewels and gave them to his servant, saying, "Here, give all of this to my family." He also took off his swords and said, "Give them these as well. Even dead, I won't return to the palace before having learned the teachings and found enlightenment. Tell them that this is where I am. Tell my parents and everybody that I shall not return until I have become a Buddha."
सिद्धार्थ आइले ज्ञान पूरा गरे बुद्ध है बन्नु हो बुद्ध है बन्नु बुद्धको देश यो शान्ति क्षेत्र नेपाललाई प्यारो छ बुद्धको देश यो शान्ति क्षेत्र नेपाललाई प्यारो छ बुद्ध शरणम गच्छामि भन्दै दर्शन गर्दछौ हो दर्शन गर्दछौ बुद्ध शरणम गच्छामि भनी दर्शनै गर्दछौ।